My wife said her ex's name at our wedding. Everyone froze. I looked around. Even the pastor went quiet. She laughed nervously and whispered, "What are you talking about?" "You heard it wrong." But I know what I heard. And later that night, I found the proof. It was supposed to be perfect. Our wedding. Every little detail had been planned meticulously. The dress, the flowers, the music, the vows. Everything had to be just right. I had imagined this day in my head for years, always seeing it in the most idealized way possible. I imagined her walking down the aisle, the soft glow of the candles illuminating her face, her smile, the way she would look at me as I waited for her. I never imagined anything going wrong. I never imagined it could feel like this. The morning started with the usual flurry of nerves and excitement. The hotel suite was filled with my closest friends, all of us trying to shake off the tension, joking, drinking a bit to calm the pre-wedding jitters. But in truth, it was all surface level. I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in my stomach, a feeling that only seemed to grow stronger as the time passed. There was something about this day that felt off, but I couldn't place it. Maybe it was the fact that I had been so focused on making sure everything went perfectly. Maybe it was the way she seemed just a bit more distant than usual in the days leading up to it. I told myself it was just my nerves. I was about to marry the love of my life after all. What could possibly go wrong? When it was time, I found myself standing at the altar, adjusting my tie, straightening my jacket. My heart was pounding. She was late, but I told myself it was because she was probably just nervous. She had always been a little anxious when it came to big moments, especially ones like this. I was fine with it. What was a few extra minutes? And then the door opened. Her father, a man I had grown to respect and admire over the years, walked down the aisle first. His face was a mask of pride, but I could see the edge of something I couldn't quite name. Behind him, she appeared, my bride. The room seemed to fade away as she walked toward me, and for a moment it was just her and me in that space. Her smile was radiant, her eyes wide with joy, the veil flowing like a gentle wave behind her. Everything about her was perfect. She was perfect. I stood there, breath caught in my chest, waiting for her to reach me. The world could have ended right then, and I wouldn't have cared. This was it. This was what I had been waiting for. We had already been through so much together. But this was the moment that sealed everything. Our love, our future. As she reached me, I took her hand, and it felt like everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. I tried to calm my nerves, tried to focus on the ceremony, but as I looked into her eyes, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of doubt. Nothing major, just a small shift. It was gone almost as soon as it appeared, a feeling I couldn't quite place. I didn't have time to dwell on it. This was our moment. The officiant began speaking, guiding us through the vows. Her voice, soft and trembling, held the weight of a promise that I had no reason to doubt. I knew she was as nervous as I was. But as we spoke our vows, I started to feel that tiny doubt return, creeping at the edges of my mind. It was irrational. It had to be. And then, as we were exchanging the final vows, it happened. "I do," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I do, James." The words hit me like a slap across the face. My chest tightened and my breath caught in my throat. "James." I froze. Her smile, the joy in her eyes, remained as if nothing had happened, but I couldn't shake it. "James." I stood there, my hand still holding hers, my mind suddenly racing. For a split second, I wondered if I had misheard her. I mean, it was a wedding. The emotions were high. People were nervous. Surely she had just said it wrong. Maybe it was just a slip of the tongue, but something deep inside me told me it wasn't. The name had come out of her mouth with such ease, such familiarity. James. I glanced at her, trying to gauge her reaction, but there was nothing there. No sign of embarrassment, no hesitation. She was still smiling, still looking at me the same way. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, that I had just imagined it, but the doubt was already starting to settle in. She saw the confusion on my face, and without missing a beat, she laughed lightly. "Oh my God, I'm just so nervous. I said the wrong name, didn't I?" She brushed it off as if it was no big deal, as if she had just mixed up the names for a second. You know how it is, babe. You're hearing things. You're just being paranoid. I wanted to believe her. I tried to. After all, we were standing there, about to start our life together. This wasn't the time to question anything, but as I looked into her eyes, I couldn't help but wonder, why James? Why that name? I nodded, forcing a smile. It's okay, I said, trying to convince myself as much as her. It's just nerves. But as the ceremony continued, the doubt gnawed at me, and I couldn't shake it. The name she'd said, James, echoed in my mind. It lingered in the air like a shadow, and no matter how hard I tried to push it out, it wouldn't go away. It was like a splinter lodged deep in my skin, causing a dull, constant ache. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. The words, the vows, the rings, all of it seemed to fade into the background as the name lingered in my thoughts. And as we moved into the reception, I tried to pretend like everything was fine, like nothing had changed. But in my mind, something had shifted. Something wasn't right. And that's when I began to question everything. The reception was a blur of laughter, clinking glasses and smiling faces. I tried my best to keep up with the whirlwind of emotions. The food was amazing, the music perfect, and the atmosphere, well, it was everything I had imagined. People came up to us, congratulating us, wishing us a lifetime of happiness, and I smiled through it all, pretending everything was exactly how it should be. But that name, James, kept ringing in my ears like a bell I couldn't unhear. We danced our first dance, and for a moment I was able to lose myself in the music, in the warmth of her embrace. She was everything I had wanted, the woman I had chosen to spend the rest of my life with. Her soft laughter filled my ear as she whispered something about the song choice, but I couldn't quite focus on her words. My mind kept circling back to that moment when she said the wrong name. James. I told myself over and over that it was just nerves, that I was being paranoid, but something inside me kept whispering, no, this isn't right. Something's off. At some point during the evening, I excused myself from the crowd to take a moment. I stepped outside onto the balcony of the venue, away from the noise, to clear my head. The air was cool, crisp. I leaned against the railing, staring out at the twinkling lights of the city, trying to get a grip on myself. Was I overreacting? Was it just a mistake? But deep down, I knew it wasn't just about the name. It was the way she said it, the way it had slipped from her lips without hesitation. James. I couldn't let it go. There had to be more to this. Maybe it was nothing, but I couldn't ignore the feeling gnawing at me. The feeling that something was being hidden, buried just beneath the surface. I was just about to go back inside when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, and there she was. My bride, standing in the doorway, looking at me with a mix of concern and curiosity. She must have noticed the shift in my mood. "Hey, you okay?" she asked softly, her voice full of warmth. But there was a tightness to it that I couldn't ignore. Like she was already trying to cover something up, to hide something. I didn't know if it was just me, but it felt like she was a little too aware of what I was feeling. I smiled, trying to reassure her. "Yeah, just needed a breath of fresh air. It's been a long day." She stepped closer, resting a hand on my shoulder. "You know, I was thinking—" She hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "Maybe we should go on our honeymoon early. We've got the rest of our lives to be together, right?" I nodded, but I wasn't really listening. The doubts were spinning in my head like a cyclone. I couldn't shake the image of her saying James. "Of course," I replied automatically, trying to sound like everything was fine, even though I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. She didn't seem to notice the hesitation in my voice, and I was thankful for that. She smiled, kissed my cheek, and we returned to the celebration. But the moment was gone. The warmth I had once felt was now replaced by a cold distance. As the night wore on, the conversations grew louder, the laughter more animated, but I felt like I was drifting further away from it all. The weight of the evening began to settle in my chest, and I realized I wasn't the only one who seemed distant. Her eyes, usually so full of love and excitement, now seemed guarded, as if she were keeping something hidden. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that I was just imagining things. But the more I watched her, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She laughed a little too loudly at jokes that didn't seem all that funny. She danced a little too energetically, as if she were trying to prove something, and when I caught her glancing at her phone, a sharp pang of jealousy shot through me. I could have sworn she was looking at a message, a text, something that made her smile in a way that didn't feel like it was meant for me. I told myself to let it go. It was our wedding day. It was supposed to be a day of celebration, not doubt. But the more I tried to push the thoughts away, the stronger they became. I couldn't stop wondering, who was James? I had never asked her much about her past, and she had never volunteered information. She had always said she didn't like talking about old relationships. At first, I respected that. I didn't need to know the details of her past. I just needed to know that she loved me. But now I wished I had asked. I wished I had asked about the people who had come before me, the Jameses of her life. The night was starting to wind down. People were starting to leave, and I could see her growing more and more impatient, as if she was relieved the day was finally ending. I watched her, trying to find any sign of guilt, any hint of what had happened, what was going on beneath the surface. But all I saw was a woman who seemed oddly at peace, like she had already moved past the ceremony, like it was just another thing she'd crossed off her list. When everyone had finally gone home, I went back to the hotel room. I felt exhausted, drained, not physically but mentally. I couldn't shake the sense of unease that clung to me. I lay in bed next to her, the woman I had married, but I couldn't bring myself to touch her. I wanted to, but the distance between us felt too vast. Her breathing slowed as she drifted off to sleep, but I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The silence in the room was suffocating. I kept replaying the moment in my head, over and over again. James, I was no fool. I knew I couldn't keep living like this, ignoring the doubts gnawing at me. But what could I do? I couldn't confront her yet, not when she was so sure it was just a slip of the tongue, not when she looked at me like I was the one with the problem. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was just beginning to scratch the surface of something much darker. Something that, once uncovered, could shatter everything I thought I knew about her and about myself. And I couldn't help but wonder, what was James to her really? The days following the wedding were a haze. I tried to push the memory of that moment out of my mind, but every time I looked at her, something inside me tightened. She was so perfect, so composed, like nothing had changed, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Every smile she gave me seemed rehearsed, every touch too gentle, as if she were trying to convince both of us that everything was fine. I tried to keep busy, focusing on work and the endless tasks that came with settling into married life. But my mind kept returning to James. Who was he? Why had she said his name? The more I thought about it, the more the unanswered question ate away at me. I told myself that I needed to stop overthinking, that I was just paranoid, letting one slip of the tongue destroy my peace of mind. But the truth was, I couldn't let it go. Not when everything about it felt so deliberate. It wasn't just a mistake. Not when she had looked me in the eye and told me it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Not to me. I started paying closer attention to her. Little things that had never bothered me before now seemed like red flags. Her phone, always face down on the table. Her texts, never fully opened in my presence. Her trips to the bathroom, always a little too long. I knew I was being paranoid, but I couldn't help it. Something in her behavior had changed. It wasn't until a few days later, when she left the house to run errands, that I made my move. I knew she wouldn't be back for a couple of hours, and I decided that I couldn't live like this any longer. I had to know the truth. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but the fear of what I might find was nothing compared to the terror of living with this doubt. I needed answers. I started with her phone. At first it was difficult. She kept her passwords tight, of course, but I had learned a few tricks over the years, how to find things she'd hidden, how to break into things without her even noticing. Her text messages were exactly what I expected. A few exchanges with friends, some work-related chatter, but nothing that raised suspicion. I scrolled back, hoping to find something, anything, that would explain James. And then I saw it. There, buried beneath weeks of innocuous messages, was an old thread. A conversation with someone named James. I froze. The messages were old, much older than the wedding. She had deleted most of them, but the few that remained were enough. I quickly skimmed through the texts. The first ones were casual at first, just friendly exchanges, a few emojis here and there. But as I read on, things became clearer. There were hints of a deeper connection, comments about how much they missed each other, how they couldn't wait to see each other again. The texts didn't sound like two people who had just been friends. They sounded like people who had been deeply involved. My heart pounded in my chest. The room seemed to shrink around me. I scrolled further, but then I stopped. One text stood out to me. "I'll always love you, even if we can't be together." My stomach twisted into knots. I couldn't breathe. Had she really loved him? Had she really been in love with him? I slammed the phone down on the counter, taking a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. But my mind was racing. James. Was this the James from the wedding? Had she been thinking of him when she said his name? When she had promised me she was ready to spend her life with me? Was she still holding on to someone else? I had to know more. I had to dig deeper. The next day, when she went out to meet friends for lunch, I decided to take my search further. I couldn't trust just the text messages. I needed to see if there was more. Her laptop was sitting on the kitchen table, and my heart sank when I saw it. I had never been the type of person to snoop through her things, but now it felt like the only option. I opened it up, and her email inbox was the first thing that popped up. I skimmed through the subject lines, my fingers trembling, and then I saw it. A subject line. "The last time we met." I clicked it open, and there it was, an email sent just a month before our wedding. It was a message from James. It was long, heartfelt, and filled with a sadness I hadn't expected. He talked about how hard it had been for him to let her go, how he still thought about her, even though they both knew they couldn't be together anymore. It wasn't just a goodbye email. It was a confession. He wrote that he still loved her, that he couldn't forget their time together, and that he regretted letting her go. It felt like a wound being ripped open. I wanted to throw the laptop across the room, but I couldn't. I had to know. I kept reading. She hadn't replied, but she had kept the email. She had kept it all this time, even after she'd met me, even after we'd gotten engaged. She had never told me about James, never mentioned that they had shared something real, something deep. How could I have been so blind? How could I have missed all of this? When she came home, I acted normal. I couldn't show her what I had found. Not yet. But the seed of doubt had taken root, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. The truth was out there, but now I wasn't sure how to handle it. I couldn't confront her with this, not yet. I had to be smart. I had to be careful. Because I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about a name. This was about something far darker, something far more dangerous. And I wasn't going to let it go. Not until I knew the full truth. The days that followed were the longest of my life. Every moment spent in her presence felt like a performance. I was still her husband, still the man she had promised to spend forever with, but I was no longer the man I had been before I found those emails. I was someone else now, someone who couldn't unsee the truth. Every glance at her made my pulse race with anxiety. The way she smiled at me, was it genuine? The way she held my hand, did it feel as warm to her as it did to me? I couldn't stop myself from doubting every word, every gesture, every glance. I started keeping my distance, not physically, but emotionally. I withdrew, and she noticed, of course. She kept asking me what was wrong, but I gave her nothing. I just told her I was tired, stressed, preoccupied with work, and for a while that seemed to satisfy her. She never suspected that I knew. She never suspected I was unraveling the truth behind her carefully constructed facade. I was too careful to confront her head on. Not yet. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the brink of something far worse than just a name mistake at the wedding. This wasn't just about an ex-lover. It wasn't about some distant ghost of the past. It was about betrayal, a betrayal I couldn't quite understand. Why had she kept this secret from me? Why had she chosen to marry me if a part of her was still holding on to him? One night, as I lay in bed beside her, listening to her slow, even breathing, I realized something I hadn't considered before. I wasn't just angry. I wasn't just hurt. I felt nothing. There was no more warmth in my chest when I looked at her, no more affection, just the cold, gnawing ache of a man who had been deceived. I had to confront her. I had to ask her everything, demand the truth, but not tonight, not yet. The next morning I found myself in a cafe, nervously scrolling through my phone. I had been avoiding her for a couple of days now, taking extra hours at the office, pretending I was working late when I wasn't. But today I was going to confront her. I couldn't take the weight of this secret anymore. I couldn't live like this. I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. I needed to know why she had lied. I needed to understand what had happened between her and James. So I did what any person in my position would do. I hired someone. The private investigator was a last resort, but by now I was willing to do whatever it took. The man I spoke to was a former cop, grizzled, jaded, with a steady demeanor that made me feel both repelled and reassured at the same time. His job was simple, to dig into my wife's past and find out who James was. Who had he been to her? Why was she still holding on to him? A few days passed. The investigator called me once or twice for clarification, but I said nothing to her. I played my part. I pretended to be oblivious, still acting like everything was fine, all while waiting for the truth to unfold. The call came on the third day. His voice was calm, but his words hit me like a punch to the gut. "I've got everything you asked for, and then some." I held my breath as he went on, laying out the facts. James wasn't just an ex-boyfriend. He wasn't some casual fling. No, James had been everything to her. They had been in a long-term, serious relationship. They had plans to marry. They had talked about a future together. But then, right before their wedding, James had been offered a job in another city. She had begged him not to go, but he left anyway, and that was when she met me. It all started to make sense now. The secret glances, the late nights she had spent talking on the phone, the emails. She hadn't just moved on from him, she had never let him go. I wasn't a rebound. I was just the next man in line. But the worst part? The investigator found more than just old emails. He found a conversation between them, one that had occurred just weeks before we had gotten engaged. They had been discussing their unfinished business, how they still loved each other. She had been on the verge of calling off our engagement, but something, perhaps the reality of being in her 30s, perhaps her fear of being alone, had kept her with me. She had never fully let go of James, though. Not really. And now here I was, standing on the precipice of something dark. I had always thought that when the truth came out, I would feel vindicated at least, but instead I felt hollow, empty. I looked at my phone, the screen still showing the investigator's last words. "I don't think she's been completely honest with you. I'm going to keep digging, but I'd advise you to prepare yourself. There's more to her than you know." I didn't need him to tell me that. I had known it all along. I put the phone down and sat in the quiet cafe, staring out the window. The world outside seemed so distant, like I was living in a bubble of my own making. The woman I had married was a stranger, and every shred of the life I thought we had built together felt like a lie. In the end, it wasn't about James. It was about the fact that she had chosen to marry me while keeping her past, her love, hidden away. It was about the fact that she had never trusted me enough to be completely open. And that, more than anything, was the greatest betrayal. When I finally got home that night, she was waiting for me, just as I had left her, smiling, unaware of the storm that was brewing inside of me. She kissed me on the cheek and asked if I had been working hard. But I wasn't interested in her questions anymore. I wasn't interested in her lies. It was time. I stood there for a moment, looking at her, weighing the decision in my mind. The thing I had feared most wasn't the confrontation. No, it was what came after. What came when I finally let the truth break free. I didn't know how to handle this anymore, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let her get away with it, not without feeling the pain she had caused me. I walked past her, ignoring the confusion in her eyes. The time had come for me to exact my revenge, and it was going to be cold. It was going to be deliberate. It was going to be beautiful. I had waited long enough. I had let the anger fester, the hurt simmer beneath the surface, and now it was time for everything to unravel. I had made my decision. No more games. No more pretending. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore, and I wasn't going to let her off the hook for what she'd done, for the lies, for the betrayal. She wasn't going to get away with it. That night, as she sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone, I stood in the doorway watching her. She hadn't noticed me yet. "Something wrong?" she asked, looking up at me with a fake smile plastered across her face. She was pretending to be the sweet, innocent wife who had no idea why I had been distant. But I knew the truth, and so did she. I didn't say anything at first. Instead, I walked over to the coffee table where I had placed everything. The evidence, the emails, the conversation that had sealed her fate. She still didn't understand. She still thought this was some misunderstanding. "You've been hiding things from me," I said, my voice steady but cold. Her smile faltered. "What do you mean?" I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the folder and handed her the papers. Every last detail the investigator had uncovered. The emails, the phone records, the messages between her and James, all of it. She looked at them, and I could see the panic start to rise in her chest. Her hands shook slightly as she reached for them, and she tried to avoid my gaze. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. "Doesn't matter. You were careless. You thought I wouldn't find out." I, I can explain," she stammered, but I wasn't listening anymore. I had heard all the excuses before. They were nothing but empty words, desperate attempts to justify what she had done. But there was no justification for what had happened. No amount of pleading could erase the fact that she had been living a double life, hiding the truth from me while pretending to be the loving wife. I took a step closer, my eyes never leaving hers. "You never stopped loving him, did you?" She opened her mouth to speak, but the words never came. She could barely breathe now, and I could see the tears welling up in her eyes. She was realizing what was happening, realizing that I knew everything. "I was everything you ever needed," I continued, my voice growing colder with every word. "But I was never enough. Not for you. Not when he was still in your head." Her face crumpled as the truth finally settled in. She opened her mouth, but the words got stuck. The shame, the guilt. She couldn't hide it anymore. "Please, I never meant for it to happen like this. I raised a hand, silencing her. "Don't. You don't get to make excuses anymore." I had already made my decision, and I wasn't going to let her have the satisfaction of begging for forgiveness. The truth was, I didn't need her apology. I didn't need anything from her anymore. What I needed was closure, and that's exactly what I was going to get. With a steady hand, I opened my phone and showed her something she hadn't seen coming. An email I had sent, not to her, but to James. The message was simple, and there was no room for misunderstanding. "I know everything. You have two choices. Leave her alone, or I'll make sure you never see her again." She gasped, staring at the phone as if it had burned her. "What did you do?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I met her gaze, my face expressionless. "I gave him a choice. If he ever tries to contact you again, if he ever dares to get in your head again, I'll make sure he regrets it." Her eyes widened in shock, and she finally understood the weight of what I had done. "You're ruining everything," she said weakly, the fight draining out of her. "You don't even care about me anymore, do you?" I looked at her, the anger that had been building over the months now completely gone, replaced by a cold emptiness. "I don't care about you anymore. Not after everything you've done." She didn't say anything else. There was nothing left to say. I had already made my decision. I had taken my revenge. Not with rage, not with violence, but with quiet, calculated precision. I had made sure James would never return to her, and I had exposed the truth to her in the harshest way possible. I turned to leave, but before I did, I spoke the final words. "Enjoy your life, without me in it." I walked out the door, the weight on my chest finally lifting. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel happy. I just felt free. Free from the lies. Free from the weight of the woman I had thought I knew. There was no more heartbreak, no more wondering. It was done. And in the end, that was the only thing that mattered. She had ruined everything, but I had made sure she wouldn't destroy me. Not anymore.